In the quiet corners of an ancient library, where dust hangs heavy in the air and the scent of aged parchment lingers, a young scholar named Elara stumbled upon something extraordinary. Hidden within the fragile pages of a forgotten tome was a map so old it seemed to whisper secrets of a time long past. Its edges were frayed, its ink faded, yet it bore a single, unmistakable marking: the entrance to the Mystical Labyrinth. For centuries, the labyrinth had been the stuff of legend, a maze said to hold the answers to lost myths and untold stories. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and a yearning for truth, Elara set out on a journey that would push her courage to its limits. With the map clutched tightly in her hand, she stepped through the shadowed archway of the labyrinth, unaware that her quest would plunge her into a world of danger, mystery, and wonder. Where are you joining us from, and what time is it there? Let's follow Elara's footsteps together as she unravels the secrets of the labyrinth and uncovers the truths of legends thought to be lost forever. Elara stepped into the labyrinth, the weight of her torch steady in her hand. Its flame danced, casting flickering shadows that seemed to breathe life into the ancient stone walls around her. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and time, a silent reminder of how long this place had waited for someone like her to enter. Her boots echoed softly against the uneven floor, each step a declaration of her resolve. But the labyrinth, it seemed, had plans of its own. Ahead, the path split into two, and there, etched into the stone, was her first challenge. A series of runes, their markings worn but still legible. They glowed faintly in the torchlight, as if daring her to make sense of their cryptic message. Elara's fingers traced the symbols, her mind racing. She knew this was no ordinary puzzle. It was a test, a key to unlocking something hidden. The runes whispered secrets of an age long forgotten, and she felt the weight of history pressing in on her. As she worked, a faint sound reached her ears. Whispers, almost imperceptible, carried on the cold air. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, weaving through the labyrinth like a ghostly melody. The words were indistinct, but their tone was unmistakable, a blend of warning and menace. Elara's heartbeat quickened, her grip tightening on the torch. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she truly prepared for what lay ahead? But then, she reminded herself why she had come. The labyrinth demanded courage, and she would not falter. With a final, decisive movement, she aligned the runes. A deep grinding sound filled the air as a section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage. The whispers grew louder now, almost urgent, as if the labyrinth itself was watching her every move. She hesitated, peering into the darkness beyond. Whatever lay ahead, she knew it would push her further than she had ever been pushed before. Taking a deep breath, Elara stepped through, the torchlight carving a path through the shadows. The labyrinth had spoken, and her journey was just beginning. As Elara ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the air grew cooler, and the faint hum of life seemed to vibrate around her. She stepped into a vast cavern, its walls adorned with bioluminescent plants that cast an ethereal glow. Veins of light pulsed through the ground, and strange, glowing creatures floated lazily in the air, their forms shifting like liquid starlight. It was as if the cavern itself was alive, breathing with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. The moment her foot touched the soft, glowing moss, the cavern seemed to awaken. The plants swayed toward her, and the creatures darted closer, their light intensifying. Elara froze, realizing the environment was not just alive, but aware of her presence. Each step she took sent ripples through the ground, and the air seemed to hum louder, as if the cavern was studying her. Then, without warning, a deep tremor shook the earth. The ground beneath her cracked, and a section of the cavern ceiling collapsed, sealing the path she had taken. Dust and debris filled the air, and for a moment, Elara felt a pang of panic. But she quickly steadied herself, focusing on the task at hand. The cavern floor shifted like a living puzzle, forming new pathways and blocking others. She had to think fast, relying on her instincts to navigate the ever-changing terrain. As she moved, she noticed the glowing creatures seemed to guide her, their light flickering in patterns that hinted at safe routes. She followed their subtle cues, leaping over gaps and squeezing through narrow passages. Her heart raced with every step, but she pressed on, determined to find a way out. Finally, she emerged into a smaller chamber, the air thick with a strange, sweet scent. Catching her breath, she glanced down at her hand and froze. A faint, glowing mark had appeared on her palm, its light mirroring the creatures around her. It pulsed softly, as though it carried a life of its own. Elara stared at it, a mix of curiosity and unease stirring within her. What did it mean, and what other secrets did this labyrinth hold? The journey had only just begun, and the labyrinth was already revealing its mysteries in ways she never could have imagined. As Elara ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to hum with an ancient energy. Her footsteps echoed softly, a lonely rhythm in the vast, shadowy corridor. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath her, and from the darkness emerged a towering figure, a massive stone golem, its eyes glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Its voice rumbled like distant thunder as it spoke, not in threats, but in riddles. To pass, you must prove your wisdom, it intoned. Each question it posed was a thread pulled from the tapestry of ancient myths, testing Elara's knowledge of forgotten tales and legendary truths. She answered with care, piecing together fragments of stories she had studied since childhood. Yet, as the golem's riddles unfolded, she began to sense something deeper. These weren't just tests of memory. They were clues, each one tied to the labyrinth's own enigmatic history. With every correct answer, the golem grew still, and finally, it stepped aside, allowing her to pass. But its parting words lingered in the air like a chilling mist. You have proven your knowledge, but the labyrinth's secrets are not easily unraveled. Darker trials await, and not all who enter will emerge. Elara's heart quickened as she pressed forward, the weight of the labyrinth's mysteries pressing down on her shoulders. What had she truly uncovered, and what more lay hidden in the depths of this ancient maze? The questions swirled in her mind, driving her onward, even as the shadows seemed to close in around her. As Elara stood at the crossroads, the labyrinth seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her decision. Before her, 3 paths stretched into the shadows, each marked by a carved symbol, glowing faintly in the dim light. One bore the image of a coiled serpent, its eyes gleaming with ancient wisdom. Another was etched with the outline of a towering oak, its roots deep and unyielding. But it was the third symbol that caught her attention, a blazing phoenix. its wings outstretched as if ready to rise from the ashes. The phoenix spoke to her, not in words, but in the quiet promise of renewal, of starting anew. It was a symbol of hope, of second chances, and it resonated with something deep within her. Without hesitation, she stepped onto the path of the phoenix, her heart pounding with both anticipation and resolve. Almost immediately, the air around her began to shift, growing heavier and warmer with each step. The walls of the labyrinth seemed to pulse with heat, and the ground beneath her feet grew uncomfortably warm. She pressed on, her determination unwavering, even as the temperature continued to climb. Soon, the path opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with roaring flames that danced and flickered in an intricate, mesmerizing pattern. The heat was intense, pressing against her skin like an invisible force, but Elara didn't falter. She knew this was the first true test of her courage, a fiery maze that demanded not only physical endurance, but also mental fortitude. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the flames, her focus sharp, her will unbroken. Every step was a battle against the searing heat, but with each one, she felt herself growing stronger, more resolute. The path of the phoenix was not just about surviving the flames. It was about rising above them, emerging transformed, and Elara was ready to face whatever came next. As Elara stepped deeper into the fiery chamber, the air grew thick with heat, each breath a battle against the scorching flames. Amid the roaring fire, something caught her eye, an object resting on a pedestal of blackened stone. It was a feather, but unlike any she had ever seen. Carved from obsidian, its surface shimmered with an otherworldly sheen, as if it held secrets older than time itself. Drawn by an inexplicable force, she reached out, her fingers brushing against its smooth surface. The moment her skin touched the artifact, a rush of images surged through her mind. She saw the phoenix in its full glory, its wings of fire stretching across the heavens. She witnessed its rebirth from ash, its cries echoing through the ages. These were not just visions, they were memories, fragments of the phoenix's legend, pieces of the labyrinth's forgotten history. The feather pulsed in her hand, its glow intensifying, and she felt a surge of energy, unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if the artifact had chosen her, imbuing her with a fragment of the phoenix's power. But this gift came with a price. The flames around her roared to life, growing fiercer and more uncontrolled. The chamber, once a place of awe, now felt like a trap closing in. Elara knew she had to move quickly. Gripping the feather tightly, she felt its energy guide her, like an invisible hand pulling her toward safety. She darted through the labyrinth of fire, her steps sure and swift, the artifact's glow lighting her path. Each burst of flame that lashed out seemed to recoil from the feather's light, as though the phoenix itself were shielding her. As she emerged from the chamber, the feather's glow dimmed, but the energy it had given her remained, a quiet hum beneath her skin. She glanced back at the fiery depths, now calmer but still alive with an ancient power. The artifact in her hand was more than a relic. It was a key, a piece of a puzzle that connected her to the labyrinth's enigmatic past. And though the flames had tested her resolve, they had also revealed a truth. Within the heart of danger, there is always a spark of hope. As the flames subsided, Elara stepped forward, her breath still heavy with the weight of what she had just endured. Before she could fully gather her thoughts, a figure emerged from the shadows, his movements fluid and deliberate. It was Kael, a rogue whose presence was as enigmatic as the stories that trailed behind him. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met hers, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Both were seekers of the labyrinth's secrets, drawn by forces they barely comprehended. Their alliance began tentatively, each wary of the other's motives. Yet, necessity forged a bond between them. Kael carried a map, etched with symbols Elara recognized from her own journey, and she shared the cryptic clues she had gathered. As they exchanged stories, a startling revelation came to light. Kael, too, bore the mark of the labyrinth, a sigil that seemed to pulse with the same inexplicable energy as hers. It was a sign their paths were not mere coincidence, but threads of a larger, more intricate design. Together, they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, their journey leading them to a chamber unlike any they'd encountered before. Walls of polished mirrors stretched endlessly, their surfaces shimmering with an almost sentient quality. At first, the reflections seemed ordinary, but as they stepped further in, the images began to shift, morphing into scenes from their pasts, haunting memories, regrets, and fears they had buried long ago. Elara's reflection showed her standing alone in a barren wasteland, the faces of those she had lost staring back at her with hollow eyes. Kael's mirrored self brandished a blade, but it was not wielded in triumph. It was stained with the blood of those he had once called allies. The maze of mirrors was no mere illusion. It was a trial, forcing them to confront the parts of themselves they had tried to forget. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to consume them. But Elara, drawing on the resilience she had honed through her trials, turned to Kael. "We can't let this break us," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Kael nodded, his usual smirk replaced by a rare, earnest determination. "Then we face it together," he replied. As they moved forward, the mirrors began to crack, shattering one by one as they pushed through their fears. The path ahead was still uncertain, but something had shifted between them. What had begun as an uneasy alliance was now a partnership forged in the crucible of shared trials. Together, they pressed on, each step taking them closer to the heart of the labyrinth, and to the answers they both so desperately sought. As Elara and Kael stepped into the mirror maze, the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The walls shimmered with reflections, but these weren't ordinary mirrors. They acted as windows into their deepest fears and regrets. Each step forward seemed to drag them further into their own vulnerabilities. Elara froze as she caught sight of herself in one of the mirrors. The image before her wasn't the confident heroine she aspired to be. Instead, it was a version of her that had failed, leaving her quest incomplete and her people unprotected. The weight of that possibility pressed down on her, threatening to paralyze her where she stood. Nearby, Kael faced his own torment. In the glass, he saw the faces of those he had let down, the choices he wished he could undo. His past mistakes played out in vivid detail, each one a sharp reminder of why he had guarded his heart for so long. The maze wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a psychological gauntlet designed to break them. But as the echoes of their fears grew louder, something unexpected happened. Elara, trembling but determined, reached out to Kael. "We can't let this define us," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Kael, though shaken, nodded. Together, he replied, his tone firm. Their bond, forged through shared trials, became their anchor. Side by side, they pressed on, refusing to let the illusions dictate their path. The maze twisted and turned, but with each step, they grew stronger, their resolve hardening like tempered steel. When they finally emerged, they found themselves in a vast chamber, dominated by a massive door. Its surface was etched with ancient symbols, and at its center was a mechanism that seemed to pulse with energy. 2 indentations in the shape of their marks, the very symbols that had brought them together, glowed faintly. It was clear that neither of them could open it alone. The door demanded unity, a final test of their partnership. Elara and Kael exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. This was their moment to prove that, despite their flaws and fears, they were stronger together. As the heavy stone door creaked open, Elara and Kael stepped into a world that defied all logic. Before them stretched a sprawling underground forest, its towering trees gnarled and twisted, their roots coiling like serpents across the damp, moss-covered ground. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and faint, ghostly bioluminescence flickered in the shadows. But this forest was no haven. It was alive with movement, teeming with creatures that seemed to have crawled straight out of ancient nightmares. Fanged beasts with glowing eyes prowled the underbrush, and winged horrors circled above, their screeches echoing through the cavernous expanse. Kael's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, his body tense and ready. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low but steady. Elara's eyes darted around, her mind racing. She recognized these creatures from the tales she'd studied, mythical guardians, twisted by time and dark magic. Their first attack came swiftly. A hulking, wolf-like creature lunged from the shadows, its claws slashing through the air. Kael met it head-on, his blade flashing as he parried and struck with precision. Elara stayed back, her mind working furiously. She recalled an old legend, a story of beasts that could only be defeated by striking a single, hidden weak point. "Kael, its chest," she shouted. "Aim for the glowing mark." With a quick thrust, Kael found his target, and the creature crumpled to the ground. Their victory was short-lived. More creatures emerged, each more terrifying than the last. Kael's combat skills were unmatched, but it was Elara's knowledge that kept them alive. She deciphered the patterns in the creatures' movements, identifying their weaknesses and guiding Kael's strikes. As they pressed deeper into the forest, a chilling realization dawned on them. The attacks weren't random. The creatures were protecting something hidden in the heart of this twisted place. The forest grew darker, the air heavier. Strange whispers seemed to drift on the wind, and Elara felt a prickle on the back of her neck. "We're not alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael's grip tightened on his sword as his eyes scanned the shadows. Something was watching them, something ancient and unknown, and the deeper they went, the more certain they became that this forest held secrets far more dangerous than the creatures that roamed it. As the group ventured deeper into the dense, shadowed forest, the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with an ancient energy that whispered of forgotten stories. There, hidden beneath a canopy of towering trees, they stumbled upon a shrine, so old it seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Its stone walls were weathered, covered in moss, yet still standing with a quiet dignity. At its center was a massive mural, intricate and haunting, telling a tale that had been lost to time. The carvings depicted the creation of the labyrinth, a monumental structure woven with magic and mystery. But part of the mural was shattered, its secrets obscured by time and decay. Elara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the damaged sections. With a steady hand and a mind sharpened by years of study, she began to piece together the missing fragments of the story. Slowly, the truth emerged. The labyrinth wasn't just a maze of corridors and traps. It was a prison, built to contain a being of immense power, a force so dangerous it could unleash chaos if freed. The mural's warnings were clear: disturb this entity, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Yet, amidst the dire cautions, there was a glimmer of hope. The carvings hinted at a way to not only survive the entity's power, but to harness it, though the path was shrouded in uncertainty. Just as Elara finished her work, a deep rumble echoed through the forest. The ground beneath them trembled, and the shrine itself began to crumble, stones falling as if the earth itself sought to bury its secrets once more. The group barely had time to react, scrambling to safety as the ancient structure collapsed behind them. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the weight of what they had uncovered pressing down on them. The labyrinth's purpose was no longer a mystery, but with that knowledge came a burden they couldn't ignore. What they did next could shape the fate of everything. Elara and Kael barely managed to leap through the shrine's crumbling entrance as stones crashed down behind them. Dust filled the air, and for a moment they could only stand in stunned silence, their breaths heavy with the weight of their narrow escape. But this was no time to rest. Before them stretched a labyrinth of tunnels, their walls slick with moisture, their paths twisting and turning into darkness. The air grew colder with every step, a chill that seemed to seep into their very bones. As they ventured deeper, a sound began to echo through the tunnel's distant, rhythmic chanting. It was low and guttural, a chorus of voices that seemed to rise and fall like a heartbeat. The sound pulled them forward, curiosity mingling with unease. What they stumbled upon next stopped them in their tracks. A cavernous chamber opened before them, lit by the flickering light of torches. In the center stood a group of cloaked figures, their faces hidden in shadow, their voices united in a haunting hymn. They were worshipping something, or someone, with an intensity that sent shivers down Elara's spine. Before they could retreat, the cultists turned as one, their chants faltering as they spotted the intruders. In moments, Elara and Kael were surrounded, their weapons stripped away. Bound and helpless, they were dragged before the cult's leader, a tall, gaunt man with eyes that burned with an almost inhuman intensity. His voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it as he spoke. "You have wandered into a place you do not understand," he said, his tone almost pitying. "But perhaps you are here for a reason. Perhaps you are more than mere wanderers." The leader's gaze lingered on them, as if he could see into their very souls. "The entity within this labyrinth is not a prisoner," he continued. "It is a guide, a force of transformation. Those who serve it are granted purpose, power beyond imagining. You could join us, become part of something greater, or," his voice dropped to a whisper, cold and final, "you could face the consequences of your defiance." Elara and Kael exchanged a glance, the weight of the choice pressing down on them. Joining the cult meant betraying everything they had fought for, but refusing might mean a fate far worse. The air seemed to grow heavier, the torchlight flickering as if in anticipation. The cult leader's gaze never wavered, waiting for their answer. Elara and Kael stood in the dimly lit cell, the damp air thick with the scent of earth and despair. The cult's demands still echoed in their minds, but their resolve was unshaken. Refusing to join had cost them their freedom, but it hadn't stolen their determination. Kael crouched by the rusted iron bars, his nimble fingers already at work on the lock, while Elara scanned the walls, her sharp eyes catching the faint outlines of ancient mechanisms carved into the stone. "This lock's old, but it's stubborn," Kael muttered, his voice low and focused. "Give me a moment." Elara nodded, her mind racing. She traced the carvings with her fingertips, her knowledge of the labyrinth's design providing a glimmer of hope. "There's a hidden release here," she whispered, pressing a series of stones in a specific sequence. A soft click echoed through the cell, and a section of the wall shifted slightly. As Kael finally twisted the lock open, their escape was interrupted by the distant murmur of voices. The cultists were gathering nearby, their conversation carrying through the tunnels. Elara held her breath, straining to catch the words. "The ritual tonight, the entity will rise," one of them hissed. Kael's eyes met Elara's, and the gravity of the situation settled over them. The cult wasn't just a group of fanatics. They were on the verge of unleashing something far more dangerous. "We have to stop them," Elara said, her voice steady but urgent. Their plan shifted in an instant. The escape was no longer just about their freedom. It was about preventing catastrophe. Moving quickly and quietly, they slipped into the tunnel, the shadows their only ally. But their freedom didn't last long. A piercing alarm shattered the silence, and the tunnels erupted into chaos. "They know we're out," Kael said, gripping a piece of broken metal he'd picked up along the way. Elara's heart pounded, but her focus didn't waver. "We don't have time to fight them all. We have to get to the ritual chamber before it's too late." The path ahead was treacherous, with cultists emerging from every corner. Kael used his makeshift weapon to fend them off, while Elara led the way, her memory of the labyrinth guiding them through its twists and turns. Every step brought them closer to the chamber, and every moment counted. As they neared their destination, the air grew heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. The cultists' chants grew louder, and the walls seemed to pulse with a dark rhythm. Elara and Kael knew they were running out of time. With a final burst of determination, they pushed forward, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them in the heart of the labyrinth. As Elara and Kael burst into the ritual chamber, the air itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing unnaturally across the walls, as if alive. The cultists, cloaked in dark robes, chanted in unison, their voices rising in a crescendo that sent shivers down the spine. At the center of the chamber, a swirling vortex of darkness pulsed, growing more intense with each passing moment. The entity's presence was palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on them, and it was clear they had arrived just in time. Without hesitation, Elara stepped forward, her obsidian feather glowing faintly in her hand. She shouted to disrupt the ritual, her voice cutting through the chants like a knife. The cultists faltered, their rhythm broken, and chaos erupted. Kael moved swiftly, his blade flashing as he engaged the nearest attackers. But the cultists were numerous, and their desperation made them unpredictable. In the fray, Kael took a brutal blow to his side, staggering back as blood seeped through his tunic. Elara's heart clenched with fear, but she knew there was no time to hesitate. She positioned herself between Kael and the advancing cultists, wielding the feather's energy with precision. Each strike of its power sent cultists reeling, but the entity's growing strength was undeniable. The vortex in the center of the room expanded, tendrils of darkness reaching out as if seeking to consume everything. Elara could feel the entity's will pressing against her mind, a relentless force threatening to overwhelm her. In that moment, clarity struck her. The feather wasn't just a weapon. It was a key, a fragment of the power that had once sealed the entity away. She turned to Kael, his face pale but determined, and saw the trust in his eyes. "I have to seal it," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Kael nodded, his hand gripping his sword tightly, ready to cover her as she acted. Drawing on every ounce of strength, Elara raised the feather high, its light intensifying as she channeled its energy. The vortex shuddered, the entity's roar echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. The cultists, realizing what was happening, lunged toward her, but Kael intercepted them, his movements fueled by sheer willpower. Elara focused, pouring her resolve into the feather, feeling its power merge with her own. The room seemed to hold its breath as the vortex began to collapse, the darkness receding like a tide, pulled back into the ocean. But the entity fought back, its rage manifesting as a final, desperate surge of energy. Elara gritted her teeth, her body trembling under the strain, but she held firm. As the vortex finally dissipated, the chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as if it had never been. The cultists, now leaderless, scattered into the shadows, leaving Elara and Kael alone among the ruins of their ritual. Elara lowered the feather, her breath ragged, and turned to Kael. He managed a weak smile despite his injury. "You did it," he said, his voice tinged with admiration and relief. But Elara knew this was only a temporary victory. The entity was sealed, but its presence lingered, a reminder that their journey was far from over. With the ancient feather now glowing in her hands, Elara feels its raw power surge through her veins like a tidal wave. She knows what must be done. Kneeling at the heart of the labyrinth, she presses her palms against the ground, channeling every ounce of her energy into the crumbling containment seals. The strain is immediate, her body trembles, her breath grows shallow, and a sharp pain radiates through her limbs. Yet she doesn't falter. The weight of the world rests on her shoulders, and failure is not an option. With gritted teeth, she focuses, her determination burning brighter than the agony coursing through her. Nearby, Kael stands guard, his wounds fresh but his resolve unshaken. Blood trickles from his side, yet he wields his sword with unwavering precision, keeping the remaining cultists at bay. Each clash of steel rings through the chamber as he fights with a ferocity born of desperation. He knows Elara needs time, and he's willing to give everything to ensure she gets it. The cultists, once so fanatical, begin to waver under his relentless assault, their confidence crumbling like the walls around them. As Elara's energy intertwines with the feather's power, the seals begin to stabilize. A soft hum fills the air, growing louder with each passing moment. The entity trapped within the labyrinth roars in defiance, its voice shaking the very foundations of the ancient structure. The sound is deafening, a primal scream of rage and despair that sends shivers down the spines of all who hear it. The cultists, their loyalty now drowned by fear, turn and flee, their frantic footsteps echoing as they disappear into the shadows. The labyrinth itself seems to respond, its walls trembling as if aware of its impending fate. Cracks spiderweb across the stone, and dust rains from the ceiling. The air grows heavy, charged with the finality of its purpose. Elara rises to her feet, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. She looks to Kael, who nods in silent acknowledgement. Together, they've done what no one else could. The labyrinth's mission is complete. The air trembled with the deafening roar of stone splitting apart, dust rising in thick clouds as the labyrinth began its final descent into chaos. Elara and Kael, battered but determined, sprinted through the disintegrating corridors, their breaths ragged and hearts pounding. Every step was a gamble, the ground beneath them fracturing as chunks of the ceiling crashed down in their wake. The narrow passageways, once a maze of secrets, now felt like a death trap closing in. With every turn, the path seemed to shift, the labyrinth mocking their efforts to escape. Elara's sharp instincts led the way, her eyes scanning for the faintest hint of daylight, while Kael's strength kept them moving, his hand firmly gripping hers. Together, they navigated the collapsing chaos, their trust in each other the only lifeline they had left. The final stretch to the exit was a frantic race against time. Debris rained down, blocking their path, but they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. As they burst into the open air, the entrance behind them gave one final groan before collapsing into a heap of rubble. The sunlight, warm and blinding, washed over them as they stumbled forward, their bodies giving way to exhaustion. Elara fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. Kael collapsed beside her, his chest heaving as he stared at the ruins of the labyrinth, now reduced to a pile of stone. The weight of their journey, the trials, the losses, the moments of triumph, settled over them like a heavy cloak. They had survived, but at a cost neither could yet fully grasp. For a long moment, they simply sat there, the silence between them speaking volumes. The labyrinth was gone, but its echoes lingered in their minds, a reminder of the legends they had unearthed and the bond they had forged. Together, they had faced the impossible and emerged on the other side, forever changed by the path they had chosen to walk. As Elara and Kael sit beneath the ancient canopy of trees, their breaths steady and their wounds slowly healing, a quiet understanding settles between them. The adrenaline of their journey has ebbed, replaced by a profound sense of reflection. Elara gazes at the faint glow of the mark on her wrist, now dimming with each passing moment. It's fading, she observes, her voice soft but steady. Kael nods, glancing at his own mark, its luminous lines dissolving like mist in the morning sun. It feels like the end of something, he says, though his tone carries no regret. The truth of the labyrinth begins to crystallize in their minds. It wasn't merely a maze of traps and riddles. It was a crucible, a test of character and courage. It wasn't trying to kill us, Elara murmurs, her eyes widening with realization. It was trying to find us, to see if we were ready. Kael leans back, his expression thoughtful. Guardians, he says, the word heavy with meaning, not just of its secrets, but of its purpose. The power it holds isn't meant to be wielded, it's meant to be protected. Their bond, forged in the fires of shared trials, remains unbroken even as the marks fade into memory. Elara smiles faintly, a rare warmth in her usually reserved demeanor. I didn't think I'd find someone who could keep up with me, she admits. Kael chuckles, shaking his head, and I didn't think I'd ever meet someone who could out-stubborn me. There's a lightness in their laughter, a shared acknowledgement of the journey that has changed them both. Yet the time comes to part ways. The labyrinth's secrets now rest within them, not as burdens, but as responsibilities. Elara stands, brushing the dirt from her cloak, her gaze steady. We'll meet again, she says, her voice carrying a quiet certainty. Kael rises beside her, his expression resolute. When the world needs us, he replies, or when I just miss your terrible sense of direction. As they walk in opposite directions, the weight of their discovery lingers, not as a shadow, but as a beacon. The legends they once studied from afar are no longer distant tales. They are part of their story now, and though their paths diverge, the respect they've earned for one another and for the ancient power they've sworn to protect will bind them across the distance. The labyrinth has chosen its guardians, and in doing so, it has given them something even greater, a shared purpose that will endure long after the marks have disappeared. As the weeks passed, Elara found herself back at her desk, surrounded by the familiar scent of old books and parchment. Yet, something was different. The myths she had once studied with a sense of detached curiosity now seemed alive, pulsating with truths she had never before recognized. Her journey through the labyrinth had stripped away the veil of mere storytelling, revealing the profound wisdom hidden within these ancient tales. She could see now how they weren't just fanciful narratives, but reflections of human experience, echoes of timeless struggles and triumphs. Inspired by this newfound understanding, Elara began to write. Her quill moved across the page with a purpose she had never felt before, chronicling not just the events of her journey, but the lessons she had unearthed along the way. She wove together the threads of myth and reality, crafting a work that was as much a personal memoir as it was a guide to the deeper meanings behind the legends. Her words carried the weight of someone who had walked the path of the labyrinth, who had faced its challenges and emerged transformed. Word of her book spread quickly, first among her peers, then to a wider audience. Scholars and enthusiasts alike were drawn to her unique perspective, her ability to bridge the gap between the ancient and the modern. She became a voice of authority in the world of myth and legend, not because she claimed to have all the answers, but because she had the courage to ask the right questions. Her work sparked conversations, debates, and a renewed interest in the stories that had shaped civilizations for centuries. Elara's journey had come full circle. What began as a quest for knowledge had turned into something far greater, a mission to share the truth she had discovered, to help others see the myths in the same transformative light she now saw them. And as her reputation grew, so did her sense of purpose. She knew her work was far from finished, but for the first time, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Kael stepped out of the labyrinth's shadow, he discovered a calling that resonated deeply with the lessons he had learned within its twisting corridors. The skills he had sharpened, strategic thinking, resourcefulness, and an unyielding determination, were no longer just tools for survival. They became the foundation of a new purpose. Instead of battling monsters or deciphering traps, he turned his attention to safeguarding the very treasures and secrets he had once risked his life to uncover. Ancient sites, their stones whispering stories of ages past, now found a steadfast protector in Kael, who dedicated himself to preserving their legacy and the forgotten knowledge they held. Though his journey had taken him far from Elara's path, the bond forged in the labyrinth remained unbroken. The trials they had faced together had woven their fates into a shared tapestry, each thread representing a moment of trust, courage, and sacrifice. Though their responsibilities now led them in different directions, they found ways to stay connected. Through letters carried by travelers across vast distances, they shared their discoveries and adventures, each message a reminder of the unspoken promise they had made to honor the labyrinth's teachings. Kael's letters often spoke of the ancient sites he guarded, describing the intricate carvings and forgotten languages he had deciphered. Elara, in turn, shared tales of the people she had helped, the villages she had revived, and the small but profound ways she was shaping the world beyond the labyrinth's reach. Their correspondence became a bridge between their lives, a testament to how their shared experience continued to shape their individual journeys. It was a quiet yet powerful connection, one that reminded them both that even in solitude, they were never truly alone. The labyrinth had not just been a test of strength or intellect. It had been a crucible that transformed them, leaving behind a legacy of purpose and an enduring bond that time and distance could not sever. Years had passed since Elara and Kael last stood within the shadows of the labyrinth, their shared adventure becoming a distant memory. But one day, a message arrived, carrying the weight of urgency and mystery. It was from Kael, his words cryptic yet unmistakable. The labyrinth's secrets were stirring once more, and with them, a new danger loomed. Elara's heart raced as she read his warning, the past rushing back like a flood. She had thought their journey was complete, their questions answered, but now it was clear the labyrinth's story was far from over. Without hesitation, Elara began to prepare. She gathered the notes she had meticulously kept over the years, maps marked with forgotten paths, and artifacts that still hummed with ancient power. Each piece was a reminder of the trials they had faced, the truths they had uncovered, and yet, those truths now seemed incomplete, as if the labyrinth had only revealed a fraction of its purpose. What new riddles awaited them? What forces had awoken in the years they had been apart? Elara didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing: she couldn't face this alone. With determination burning in her chest, she set out to find Kael. The bond they had forged in the labyrinth's depths was unshakable, and together they had always been stronger. As she traveled, her mind raced with possibilities. Was this new threat tied to the artifacts they had recovered, or had they inadvertently awakened something ancient, something far beyond their understanding? The labyrinth had always been a place of both wonder and peril, its secrets guarded by layers of myth and legend. Now it seemed those layers were peeling back once more. The legacy of the labyrinth was alive, its mysteries refusing to fade into obscurity. Elara couldn't help but feel a strange mix of dread and excitement. This was more than a call to action. It was a summons to unravel a story that had been centuries in the making. As she moved closer to her destination, the air seemed to hum with the promise of discovery. Whatever awaited her and Kael, one thing was certain: the labyrinth's secrets were far from solved, and their journey was about to take an unexpected turn. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the labyrinth's ancient stones, Elara and Kael stood together once more. Their reunion was not just a meeting of old friends, but a merging of shared trials and triumphs. The weight of their past adventures had forged a bond that neither time nor distance could break. Stories of the labyrinth's mysteries swirled around them, but now they were no longer mere travelers. They were its guardians, its storytellers, and its protectors. Elara's eyes met Kael's, and in that glance, a silent understanding passed between them. The scars of their previous journey, both physical and emotional, were reminders of how far they'd come. Yet, those same scars were also proof of their resilience, their unyielding spirit. The labyrinth had tested them, shaped them, and now it called to them once more. A new threat loomed on the horizon, its shadow creeping into the heart of the ancient maze. But this time, they were ready. Together, they began to prepare. Elara's knowledge of the labyrinth's lore, painstakingly gathered over countless hours of study, now served as their map. Kael's strength, honed through battles fought and won, would be their shield. They had grown individually, but it was their unity that made them formidable. The labyrinth's whispers grew louder, urging them forward, as if the very walls recognized their purpose. Though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, they stepped forward without hesitation. The labyrinth was no longer just a place of mystery. It had become a part of their story, a living testament to their courage. Its legends were not just tales of the past, but a call to action for those willing to listen. Elara and Kael knew they were part of something far greater than themselves, a timeless narrative that would continue long after their journey ended. As they ventured deeper into the maze, their footsteps echoed with a quiet determination. The labyrinth's secrets awaited, and with them, the chance to write the next chapter in its enduring tale. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, not as mere adventurers, but as legends in the making.